My name is Esther Koch, and it is a pleasure to be here today. Some of my learnings, both professionally as a gerontologist, but also personally in the role that I played as primary caregiver to my mother during the last 10 years of her life. I am also a GSB graduate. Never thought that I would ultimately be in the field of eldercare. I had a career in the field of finance as a chief financial officer, but I reinvented myself and got a graduate degree in gerontology, which is a multidisciplinary study of the field of aging. And my interest has always been in my cohort group, the boomers, and our aging. So I have an aging advisory services firm that focuses in really two primary areas: elder care, which with respect to the role that a boomer might play for their parent, but then as they age, what is elder care look like for them, and what are their needs and desires when it relates to themselves. And then the other area is Medicare. But my greatest success, whether professionally or personally, is indeed to my mother. I know that I improve the quality of her life. I also improve the length of her life, but more importantly, the quality of her life. Nobody's going to take that away from me. It can never be diminished. And it was during that time that I actually had some of the most cherished memories of my mother. I want to start with what I think is really the most important points with respect to elder care. And caring for an aging parent and being their advocate may indeed be the most challenging and difficult role that you will ever assume in your life. And it's a role that far too many people delay in assuming or deny until a crisis occurs, and also frequently think of it only in its negative terms, and they don't get to the point of getting those cherished memories. So let's start with a backdrop on elder care. This is a work and family class. Elder care is about family. And as a matter of fact, the primary caregivers for elder care are unpaid family caregivers. If you quantified their worth, that would be over $500 billion a year, quantified worth of those unpaid family caregivers. But a lot has changed over time. And actually not all that, relatively recently. When I think back on my mother's generation, what was family? It was this nuclear family. It was this Ozzie and Harriet family. People lived in the same place. Families were relatively tightly knit. Today, what do you have? You have divorce, you have a me generation, you have sibling rivalries, you have a lack of respect for elders, particularly in the US culture. So families really are certainly more dysfunctional, certainly emotionally dysfunctional. Also, it used to be, so to the women in the group, it used to be married, non-working housewives who perform that elder care role. Well, actually, generally, we don't exist in that manner anymore. So what you find is that today's elder caregivers are working. So before, non-working, now working. Also, this working woman is generally not crossing over and taking care of her husband's parents. So this non-working housewife, my mother took care of her parents and she took care of my father's parents. That's not happening anymore. And so what you're finding is that now men are taking on that role. And I want to make a comment to the men in the class. They are stepping up to the plate much in the same way that you're stepping up to the plate in terms of childcare. So that's a different dynamic. You also have, now that people are working, you can quantify the cost of this elder care. Before, it kind of was free because you never quantified the work of this non-working housewife. So now the cost to you, either in paying for caregivers, paying for assisted living, or if somebody goes out of the workforce, you see income foregone. So there's an actual monetary cost to caregiving, which wasn't really part of the equation before. You also have childbearing later in life, so you have a sandwich generation, so someone might be caring for their children at the same time they're caring for their parent. And you also have long-distance caregiving, which can be, as I see some of the faces in here, can be more internationally based, not just within the United States. So all of these are more difficult in terms of the challenges of caregiving. So I'd like to give you 7 guidelines to keep in mind when the time comes for you to take on this role. And I know when I was at business school, my father was 75 years old, so my father was older, so perhaps you have an older parent, so this affects you personally already. I will admit, the idea of caregiving never entered my mind when I was sitting in a class like this at business school. But it may be more helpful if you think in terms of the role that your parent is now playing with your grandparent, or what role can you play now with your grandparent. So first, let's start with a myth buster. Elder care is not child care for the elderly. Child care tends to be logistical in nature, it decreases over time, and you as the parent have the final say-so. Versus elder care, which tends to be emergency in nature, increases over time, and you're your parent's advocate. You're playing an advocate role. You are not the decision maker unless they have lack of capacity, and that's something that Sherry's going to be speaking about next. So it's a very different role, and also your parent's been making decisions all their entire life. Your child has not been making those decisions. So it's a very different interplay. Number 2, the psychology, a little of the psychology of aging. Caregiving is emotion-based. These are all emotional issues, and usually they deal with loss. And the way to think of it is from a standpoint of you're trying to give somebody quality of life and aging with dignity. And you really need to be successful, you need to come from a place of compassion. That's where you need to come from. It also may be an area that you're probably not going to be successful unless you can get to forgiveness. And that would mean forgiving your parents, it might mean forgiving your siblings, and certainly it may indeed mean forgiving yourself. So forgiveness can be important because if you can't get to forgiveness during your parents' lifetime, it is likely that you will have regrets the rest of your lifetime. And if there's a mantra or a point zero to always go back to, it's how do I want to be treated when I'm this age? If you go back to that, you'll be in the right perspective on decisions making that can help your parent. So now some tactics. Communication is absolutely key. So let's talk about communicating with your parents. You can't start these conversations too early. So it is great that you have the benefit of this knowledge and starting these conversations early. And the reason is it kind of diffuses some of this emotionality where it's like, well, what if when you're 75 or 80, how might you want to do this? Versus critical situation, what do I do now? So it's a really different interplay in discussing issues. And you may need to build a foundation of trust over time. If you don't have that foundation with your parents now, you're going to need to build it over time so that indeed when they are older, they will feel trust in your assistance. Also, these are not one conversations. So you may think your parents shouldn't drive a car, and you may think you can just say to them, I don't think you should drive a car now, and that'll be the end of it. None of these are one conversations. These are life issues that need to be addressed over time and thoughtfully addressed. You need to listen. So any conversation you have, you are not really doing the talking. You're doing the questioning. You're there to listen. That is your role. It's on their time, not on your time. No multitasking, no cell phone in the room. And you really need to be supportive. So the kind of statements that you would use, not you should do this, you should do that, why aren't you doing it? It's I'm concerned about your safety and potentially you'll have an accident and injure yourself. I'm concerned, you're coming from this I'm concerned, I statements, not you statements. So find out what their desires are when they're older. Where do they want to live? How do they want to live? What are the medical conditions that they have? What medications are they taking? Who are their doctors? What type of social support systems do they have? Do you have their insurance card? What are their treatment priorities if they get a serious disease like cancer? What are their end of life preferences? And what you also have to get to the point of what are their finances? Who's going to be managing their finances? Who might be paying their bills? Are the appropriate legal documents in place? What are their support sets? This is actually pretty important. What is their social support structure? Because you may actually have to tap into that. And how do you start? You have a great entree here with this class. This can be the entree. I'm taking this class at Stanford now and And you can always use this class for the rest of your life. I remember this class that I had at Stanford, and this is what was said. And there's some other ways to make an introduction, and it has to do with, let's see, birthdays. So you got 3 of those during the year. Even if one parent is deceased, you can use the birthday of the other parent as an entree point. Now that dad is passed, so we have birthdays, you have Mother's Day and Father's Day. You just passed Mother's Day. Father's Day is coming up, but I can tell you any day is Mother's Day or Father's Day. There's Valentine's Day. There's one holiday that I think is great is Thanksgiving, because there's the spirit of Thanksgiving and being grateful. It's also a 4-day weekend so that it's less hurried. Versus Christmas, sometimes there's a little too much going on in the Christmas season, so there's distracting priorities. And then also certainly the beginning of the year, now that the new year has started. And you also have for finances after April 15th, because that's when they file a tax return, so that can be an entree. So you have plenty of entrees on how to start these conversations. With siblings, frequently with siblings, the concept of forgiveness really comes into play. Partially because this may be the first time you're going back to your family of origin. So maybe now, if you're in your late 20s, that was 10 years ago. But if you're dealing with this in your late 40s, that was 30 years ago. So there's a lot of time that's passed. So you really have to get over what might have happened in the sandbox, I like to say, and see your siblings in the light of today, not the memories of the past. And also, you may want your siblings to see you in the light of day, not in their memories of you in the past. It goes both ways on this. So how can you be of assistance to your parents? Here, the concept of equal but fair comes into place. The responsibilities may not be equal, but they need to be fair. So for instance, and this is maybe the reality for you, you may be the sibling that makes the most money. So your contribution may be a monetary contribution. Somebody else may be the favored child. They may be the one that makes the initial introductions of the topics. Someone else may have a medical background. Maybe they go on medical appointments. Somebody else may live closer. They touch base with them and check in on them at their home. So it may not be equal, but there has to be some fairness to it. Also, you're probably going to have family meetings, which may start out frequently, once a week, may go less often. Someone does have to be the leader. The group does have to decide on the leader. That leader, you cannot be dictatorial if you are the leader. And if you're part of the group, you can't make pot shots at this leader, because it is the quality of life of your parent that you're dealing with. So the third area of communication is with healthcare providers. You have to understand that these doctors and nurses do have an impact on your parent, on potential life and death situations. So if you Google your parent's symptoms and send an email to the doctor saying you feel the definitive diagnosis is X, that is not in any way going to help your parent. But if you go with your parent to that doctor visit with compassion, so that they know, the doctor knows of your concern for your parents, that is the way to approach it. And it also may, with HIPAA rules, those doctors may not talk to you otherwise because you're not the patient. And with paid caregivers, these are the people that really have the closest impact on quality of life, other than what you can do for your parents. So a lot of respect should be paid to paid caregivers, whether coming into the home or in assisted living or skilled nursing. So now let's some other tactics. If something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't, and expect it to change. So there's going to be warning signs, but if your eyes aren't open to it, you're just not going to see them. So how might that be? Gee, mom seems to be losing weight. Well, that could actually be physical or mental decline. She may no longer be able to drive the car safely. She doesn't feel she can drive to get to the store, to do the shopping, to carry it back home, to then get it into the house, or to cook. So that could be physical ability or mental ability. It could also be the onset of a medical condition or the flaring up of an old medical condition. It could be depression. It could be a dental problem. It could be any of those. One key area that might be helpful in that situation is to always look in your parents' refrigerator. You can tell a lot from a refrigerator on how somebody is doing on their day-to-day life. Here's another one, depression. You know, dad seems depressed. Okay, what are you going to do about it? So that story, one story that was shared to me was of a caregiver, a daughter. My dad said he was depressed, and I just didn't feel comfortable. I didn't know what to do. 2 weeks later, he was dead. There's a depression, there's a will to live associated with that. And it's not just physical health or mental health, it's functioning abilities. So that's activity, ADLs, activities of daily living, bathing, dressing, eating, toileting, transferring, cognitive impairment, and also incontinence. But there's also instrumental activities of daily living, which would be ability to manage money, ability to take meds, to do cooking, to do cleaning, to go grocery shopping, to drive themselves someplace, to use a telephone. So these are all functioning abilities, and it's frequently the functioning abilities that are impacting someone and their ability to lead their life as they get older. Emotional well-being, social support structures are really important. We're social animals. If your parent's now living alone, how many people are interacting with them? So your social interaction is very important. That can be family, it can be family by choice. So you need to get an assessment of where their situation is, addressing all of those matters that I just talked about, but also things like finances, their living conditions, and home safety. But all of this change is constant. That's going to be constant in all of this. And unfortunately, it's decline. It's a decline. It's going to be continued losses. So change is constant. There are no perfect answers, so that the decision that you help to implement today may not be the right decision for tomorrow or the next day. Change is going to be constant, but you have to continue to think of it as what is best for, how would I want to be treated in this situation, what provides them the best quality of life and the ability to age with dignity. So finances. You know, this is actually could be an issue for your parents, and that could affect you. So the boomer generation has not done a really good job at saving for retirement. Two principal areas, housing. Used to be houses were paid off. Now people, as they're older, have mortgages to pay. So that I think the statistic is about 60% of boomers do not have the resources that they will need after age 65 unless they continue to work. They may not be able to continue to work because of ageism, or they might have some physical or mental inabilities that will also mean that they can't work. So it's not a foregone conclusion that working after 65 is going to work. And personal care, these activities of daily living that I just talked about, those are the individual's responsibility. That is not the responsibility of Medicare. Medicare pays for medically necessary conditions. So that would be a hospital visit, a doctor visit. Medicare does not cover whether your parent needs somebody in the home to assist them with their medications or their shopping, et cetera, et cetera. And those numbers can be huge. $25 an hour, which would be a minimum for a home aide. If you do that 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, that's $26,000 a year. If you do that on a 24/7 basis, one person, that's over $220,000 a year. Assisted living is in the $3,500 to $6,500 range. So there you're talking about $40,000 to $80,000. Skilled nursing at $250 a day up, you're talking about $100,000. So these are real numbers, and they're big numbers. So savings for many boomers is not going to be for the golden age of retirement. It's going to be for housing and personal care. And that financial gap may indeed fall to you. And the cost implications are not just personal, they do also impact corporations. So your role as managing people, it is very likely that someone in your employee group will be dealing with elder care. And that is to the tune of quantified 25, 30 plus billion dollars a year of, if you quantified the cost of that time, whether it be somebody's absent, they've taken family leave, etc. But probably one of the biggest places that I think is underestimated is what's called presenteeism. So that when somebody is present, but they're really not present, and maybe you've experienced that in a class or two, hopefully not this class where you're sitting there but you're not present, this aspect of presenteeism. And if your parent is dealing with elder care and they're working, let me tell you, they are probably spending a lot of hours dealing with elder care issues, and they do not want their employer to know that. So I think it's the tip of the iceberg on that. So point number 6, caregiver stress, it is real. And it impacts families differently. So if you're a functional family, you love your parent, you want to do everything you can for your parent, so you are totally there for your parent. And you don't even call yourself a caregiver, and because of that, you don't realize the stress that has come upon you until it really is too late. And interestingly, if you don't want to be a caregiver, then it's the perceived burden of caregiving that is the stressor to you. But in either case, both have negative aspects on your health. And the last point to me is really the most important point. And if there's only one point that you remember that I say today, I hope it's this one. It's what I call creating moments of joy. And I actually do believe that this is the best prescription for caregiver stress that any doctor can give. So far too many people think of caregiving in its most negative terms. And because of that, they may miss out on some of the most cherished memories of their life. Because the greatest gift you can give someone is your time. And as precious it is to you, it's even more precious to your parents. So let's say, why don't we say 75? Okay, that's 75. Okay, so how much more time do they have? 75, when I started Stanford, my father passed away between my 2 years at Stanford. You think they're going to live to 80? Okay, how about 85? And 90? You really don't have that much time. As precious time is to you, it's even more precious to them. So don't get so lost in the doing for your parent that you forget the being with your parent. And be a facilitator of experiences, not just a caregiver. And that's going to start off with the bigger things. But as your parents' world gets smaller, joy is in the moment, and it's even some of those smaller things that can be the most lasting memories. And remember that just because somebody has lost the ability to remember, it doesn't mean they've lost the ability to feel. And also, just because they have a diagnosis for Alzheimer's or dementia does not mean that they're demented all the time. So this was a great experience I had. I was on an Alaska cruise, and I saw a gentleman, middle-aged gentleman, with his, turned out to be 91-year-old mother on this cruise. And they were laughing, and you could tell they were teasing each other. And so I went up to him when he was alone and asked if I could identified myself, asked if I could talk to him about his caregiving. And he said, well, that would be fine, but I tucked my mother in at 8:30 so we can meet at 9 p.m. And I said, okay. So I started out with, so I think this is great, this role of caregiver. And he immediately shut me off and said, I don't think of myself as a caregiver. If I think of myself as, it just has this burden. If I think of myself as a caregiver, at best I get to neutral. But if I think of myself as a facilitator of experiences, at worst, I get to neutral. So and his biggest regret was that he didn't do this starting 20 years earlier. So I seek to make the ordinary extraordinary. I had a great picture from another caregiver that sent it to me. She had somebody taking a picture of her on her mother, I think it was 94th birthday. She was doing a selfie with her mother, Make the ordinary extraordinary. Because joy is in the moment, and it really is in the simplest of things, in just some possible areas. The power of touch. I always was holding my mother's hand. The power of words. You can never say, I love you too many times. And if you don't know how to say, I love you, I got to tell you, Hallmark will help you. Father's Day is coming around. Get a card for Father's Day. Send it to your father. Send it to your grandfather. Change it to grandfather. Send it to them. Buy 2 cards. You take the other one. Read it to them in person or read it to them over the phone. The power of words, really powerful. We're social animals. Family, friends, grandchildren, really any kind of children. And let's take animals to another extent. The power of pets. Cats, dogs, pets can provide such compassion for people and just make them feel good. Music therapy, there's some wonderful, make a playlist of your parents' favorite songs and set them up so that they could hear that. There's a wonderful movie, Alive Inside, and it talks about the power of music into the brain, and it's been used on severe Alzheimer's and dementia patients. So there's a lot to be said for music therapy. And then you can always make an event, and I have wonderful memories of all the events that I would make up for my mother. So be creative. Because this is what really brings the special meanings to elder care. So make memories, get to forgiveness, start early, no regrets. Because joy is in the moment, forgiveness is in the moment, but I'm telling you, regrets can last a lifetime. So in closing, may your life be filled with no regrets. May you see the extraordinary in the ordinary. And may someone be there to brighten your world as you age. Thank you.